Welcome to the Leading at the Next Level podcast with Dove Development Consulting, the show built to provide ongoing support for your leadership journey. Before we move into today's lesson, let's make sure we're on the same page. We've seen firsthand how much more is required to provide authentic leadership to a team than to simply manage based on the authority that comes with the title or position. What we've learned through more than 50 combined years of leadership responsibility is that taking the extra steps to serve people and earn influence will always produce results that barking orders never will. And if you'll stick with us to the end of this episode, we'll share how you can get a complimentary trial to a resource that we've built that's like nothing else you've ever seen. Now, with that in mind, let's get to work. This episode continues in the series of looking at the cost of constantly recruiting, and it talks about how great leadership really does improve the entire recruiting process. So earlier I mentioned starting that new job, March 12th, 1996, that I thought, gosh, this is going to get me through college. And I referenced how much that organization invested into the process of hiring 40 people out of 1,000 or so candidates who applied. What I didn't share then was how much of that investment came during just the first 2 weeks we were on payroll. After the interview process was done, the company certainly had a ton of time and money tied up in the process before we ever set foot on property. Several rounds of interviews offsite, competency testing at a local tech school. They did background checks. They did drug screens, which, gosh, you shouldn't confuse that with drug testing, because testing's a whole different ball of wax, right? And it was kind of taboo to test drugs back then, but they could screen you for them, right? That all carried a pretty hefty price tag, all the things they did leading up to it. But I would argue individually for us 40, it was just a fraction of what they invested into having all of us go through 2 full weeks of orientation. Now, at that point in time, I just shared with somebody recently, the starting wage for hourly positions at that facility was $9.48 an hour, both factoring in any of the benefits, which were some of the best in the Shenandoah Valley here where we live at the time. They paid each of us almost $1,000 to sit in a training room for 2 solid weeks, some of which was covering the processes and procedures that we'd soon be expected to follow to the letter. But just as much of it was FaceTime with management team at that point in time. Now, I won't pretend like I can remember the majority of the material that was shared over the course of those 2 weeks. I can't. But my point isn't to make a case for whether 2 weeks is good, 2 weeks is bad, or even if it was necessary to go through all that. What I do remember, like it was yesterday, was the impression that plant manager made with us from day one, and how he walked the talk for the next several years he was part of that organization until he retired. The things that stood out to me the most were his focus on the importance of safety, him making sure that we knew, hey guys, I'm always approachable, and also his emphasis on how we should pay very, very little attention to the rumor mill in that facility. And with regards to the rumors, I remember to this day, he talked about it. He says, hey guys, here's the deal. You're going to hear a rumor every single day. And if for some reason you don't hear one any given day, go ahead and start one before you leave. Now, of course, he was joking about that. But he was incredibly serious about safety and how approachable he was. In fact, gosh, I saw him on the shop floor interacting with the off-shift crew, the crew that I was a part of, more in just my first month than I'd seen the construction foreman at the job I came from in the entire year I worked there before. And that foreman was only responsible for 6 or 8 people on that one crew. It's not like he was doing a lot of other stuff. He just wasn't very engaging. Where this plant manager in a facility, I think it was maybe 700 or so folks at the time, on the off shift, he was more visible than that guy was with 6 or 8. It was pretty remarkable, but gosh, it made us feel welcome, right? Now, fast forward to late 2013 and most of 2014, I was doing almost all the hiring at that same facility that I'd started at in March of 96. At that point in time, the amount of time we were given to get all the new hire paperwork completed, cover all the rules and regs, and to provide those new employees with an introduction to our safety and quality processes was limited to just 4 hours. Those new team members, they spent typically the rest of their first day engaged in something somewhat similar to what they would be doing moving forward, right? Now, I'm still not making a case for when I make that comparison, the 4 hours versus 2 weeks. I'm still not making a case for whether the amount of time is good or bad. That's not my point here. I will challenge you, though, to really consider which version of orientation in that same facility provided the new folks coming on board with more exposure to the local leadership team. Now, since I'm not very patient, and in this setting, I can't give you a whole lot of time to guess, I'm just going to lay it out. During my final 18 months with that company, the time I mentioned before, where I hired 225 folks, we were doing an orientation almost every single week with multiple folks. I don't remember a single instance where the plant manager ever even said hello to one of the groups of new employees. To that end, the only managers who were involved in that orientation process regularly were the safety manager and the quality manager. Interestingly enough, both of them I still consider close friends today. And I really feel that's probably tied back to the fact that they actually gave a crap about the people we were bringing into the organization. Now, here's one more question I want you to consider. If you worked in that facility under both of those management teams, which would you be more likely to want to recommend to your friends or family as a place to consider when they're looking for employment? Kind of rhetorical, right? In March 22, Forbes.com published an article by a lady named Carla Reffold called 3 Reasons Why Your Leaders Are Essential in the Recruiting Process. And it shared this. Improvements in the recruiting process often focus on candidate experience. An important thing to keep in mind. Further improvements might focus on interview training for hiring managers, ensuring they focus on on a welcoming and fair process, yet leaders are noticeably missing from the attraction stage of that process. She closed it by saying, in a world where the need for talent has never been more pressing, your best leaders might be the missing piece of the puzzle. Now, while the example I shared here before from one of our area's largest manufacturing facilities, I can honestly say that with a few select few exceptions, I've seen very, very little difference in the level of involvement for management and ownership, even in small businesses, as compared to that big business example I shared. We are indeed in a world where every organization has a pressing need for talent, even if there's not a now hiring sign up in the front yard or on the internet or their website or whatever. My guess is almost every organization says, hey, we'll take top talent, we'll find a place to put them. I'm convinced that this absence of leadership in the recruiting and onboarding process is sending a very loud message to every potential candidate that's driving the recruiting costs even higher. And quite honestly, it's killing a lot of profitability, right? Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at the 3 lessons that Reffold alluded to, and then we'll dig into what this lack of visibility with leaders can do to a culture. So if you've ever seen the 1980s TV show Cheers, you can probably hear the theme song in your head right now that wraps up with a line where everybody knows your name, and you got the thing. If not, go to YouTube, check it out. Cool series, a lot of fun, a lot of drunks on bar stools, but it's a fun show, right? And you know the song. Now, whether it's a friendly neighborhood bar in Boston like Cheers was set in, or it's your favorite local restaurant in your hometown, or the place that you earn your living, don't we feel at least a little bit more appreciated when the people that we're interacting with, when the people that we're interacting with know our names? Gosh, that's not new. In 1937, Napoleon Hill wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, and he shared that a person's name is to that person the sweetest, most important sound in any language. Gosh, with his statement in mind, think back to the examples I shared before, contrasting the involvement of management teams in just the recruiting process when I started in a local manufacturing facility in the mid-90s and just before I left in late 2014. I'm not going to bother asking you to consider which would have made you feel more welcome or appreciated. That would be a stupid question, right? And I'm not even going to ask you which environment you believe yielded the most or the best candidate referrals from existing employees. But if you're not completely sure already, I'd challenge you to reach out to me directly and I'll clear that up for you pretty quickly. What I do want to challenge you to think about is how that distinct difference in involvement in just the recruiting process set the tone for how every supervisor reporting to those two very different management teams interacted with the newest members of the team as well as everybody else that had been there for years. Gosh, when an owner of a company or an executive shows through their own behaviors rather than just their words that each employee and customer is important to them, doesn't it stand to reason that, say, showing the same kind of value would cascade down through every level of an organization? I mean, whether that's saying hello each morning, making time in their day to hear a concern, or just being able to call somebody by their name sends a message to that individual that they're just as important, if not more important, than any individual transaction that they're involved in, right? Now, how about the inverse? If the door to my office is always closed, if I'm not willing to take questions during meetings, and after more than a year and a half in the organization, I still only know the names of a select handful of employees, how much value have I shown to you or anybody else there? And if I've made it that obvious that I don't value the folks who have been there for years, is it very likely that I'm going to show any value to the ones that are coming in? Again, some rhetorical questions for you, but I think it drives a strong point. They're fairly straightforward, and those answers aren't necessarily hard to figure out. The part that surprised me the most, though, was how quickly a few high-level managers taking that approach changed an entire culture, and how fast that change impacted the recruiting process as well as the overall quality of candidates for a company that had a long-standing reputation as being one of the best employers, the employers of choice in a region. And it changed within, gosh, less than 18 months. I would argue it was 6 to 8 to 12 months that changed the whole culture, the whole reputation. Now, for more than 20 years, I've heard John Maxwell emphasize everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, while I'm very intentional about who I will and who I will not refer to as a leader, that doesn't change the fact that each of us, when we're in a supervisory or management role, we still hold leadership responsibility, whether we've earned that title or not, or whether we accept it as such or not. How we do or do not handle that responsibility, guys, it makes an immediate impact on the culture of our team as well as the candidate's desire to become part of that team. And that's where the cost of recruiting can become a significant profitability killer in our organization. Now, to build a culture where we capture that lost profit, our actions need to speak louder than our words. So I doubt it would be very, very difficult to choose which management team you would have preferred working for. I can tell you which one I preferred working for. The one where everybody knew our name, or the one where nobody seemed to care if we even had a name, right? Especially if all the other factors were involved were about the same, the pay, the benefits, if everything else were about the same, the type of work, all that. Quite frankly, I've seen a ton of folks accept substantially lower pay and more difficult working positions to become part of a team where the leaders of the organization made a consistent effort to show that they were valued as individuals, show that they have valued the people that were working on the teams for them. Now, with that in mind, let's consider the three things that Carla Reffield referenced in her article that I referenced earlier. She spelled out the impact leaders who were involved in the recruiting process could have on the overall mission of the organization as well as the values, how this also yielded a positive return on investment, capturing at least some of that profitability that's often killed when leaders choose not to be present for whatever reason in that recruiting process. Now, another article that I found, it was called "Here's Why Leadership Should Be Involved in the Hiring Process for Every Early Employee." It was by someone named Glenn Allison, who was CEO for a company called Honey. He shared, "I believe every company should make sure that someone from their leadership team plays a direct role in hiring." And Allison went on to share in that he emphasized that leadership is uniquely qualified to screen for those less tangible skills required of working at startups. Now, I'm going to take it a step farther. I don't disagree with what he said. I think it's important for startups, but I would go so far as to say that I think leadership's involvement is just as important for long established companies too, and not just to detect the right skills, but to send the right message. Now, One of the key points that Cindy and I make when we share a lesson that we wrote a while back called Building Buy-in Around a Clear Mission and Vision is that leaders cannot share the mission or vision with their team just once and then move on. Leaders also don't have the luxury of delegating that message to other supervisors or managers on their team to just share it on their behalf. If leaders have any level of involvement in the recruiting or even the onboarding process, they have the opportunity to begin sharing that mission, that vision with the new or even potential team members from the very, very beginning, to start seeding that message that they can continue from then on. Now, when leaders make that choice to show up early in the recruiting process and they maintain a positive presence with all their team members on a routine basis moving forward, you can expect to see a significant increase in the number of candidates your current employees are willing to refer to the organization. And I really believe the quality is going to be significantly better too. Now, while that can make a dent in the profitability that's killed by the typical recruiting process, there's a couple specific things a leader can do that requires more than just showing up in that process.
Thanks for listening to the Leading at the Next Level podcast. Next time, we're going to pick up where we left off by digging into how we can develop a strong recruiting pipeline in our organizations. Now, if you'd like to go deeper into anything that we've shared with you here, or you need continuing education credits for your professional credential, send us an email at admin@dove-development.net, and we'd be happy to hook you up with a 45-day all-access trial to our complete Leading at the Next Level program at no cost. The full program, it includes access to well over 100 hours of digital lessons, complete with slides and action-based assessments to help you capture measurable bottom line improvements in your organization. It also includes 2 live lessons each month that close with live one-on-one Q&A, so we can help you identify the specific action you want to take to lead your team more effectively.